And we've got a lot to get through in the next 25 minutes or so I'm going to get into it pretty quickly. But Ambassador Tom Barrack, thank you very much for joining us today. You have a pretty hectic travel schedule. I think this week you've already been to Damascus, you've been to Muscat, Dubai, and now Abu Dhabi. You've got an extremely busy role. I'd like to first zoom out and speak about the Middle East, or at least the part of it that's the Levant and Turkey that's part of your remit. In October, around the time of or just after the ceasefire in Gaza between Hamas and Israel was announced, President Donald Trump said, the Middle East has come together for the first time in 3,000 years, and he spoke about, and I quote, a golden age for the Middle East. What is your take on that? Do you think we're there yet, or do you look at what's still going on in Gaza with, still almost daily deadly attacks and what's going on in the south of Lebanon and even Syria and say we're still a long way off that?
Yeah, it's a great unsolvable question, because it's, what we're dealing with is the most difficult zip code in the world. I mean, Stephen is here. He's worked for our boss before. And I think you start with, which is what I tell both my bosses, which is President Trump and Secretary Rubio, which is also the national security advisor, which is a genius move. And you have to look at realistically. Is Abraham couldn't do it, Ishmael and Isaac couldn't do it, Moses couldn't do it, Jesus couldn't do it, 7 Crusades couldn't do it. So to think that you're going to do it in 2 years is probably not realistic. And what does that mean to do it? So what President Trump has done is run to event-driven diplomacy, because what worked before never worked, right? For the last 100 years, since the hand of the West has been involved, from Sykes-Picot to McMahon to Balfour, everything the West has imposed on the Middle East has been a disaster. We've had 92 regime changes. None of them have worked. We go back and forth between federalism and centralization. None of that has worked. So we tap out every time. And it's not political, right? It's just the difficulty of finding an imposition on tribes, which has basically been bred on blood and relationships, and imposing these Western mandates. It just has not worked. So if you go from Egypt to Iraq to Lebanon to Tunisia to Yemen to now moving across in North Africa and Sudan and Somalia, this imposition of Western mandates hasn't worked. So you now have a new theme, which is President Trump's theme, of saying, I'm going to let the region be the region. We have to stop imposition and flood it with the hope of prosperity. It's the only thing that works. The Abraham Accords is that, right? Is how can we go from a payphone to Starlink? You can do it because everything is different. So putting aside regrets of the past, the tribal aggravation of really what it is. And you look at, the UAE is a great example of what can be done. 1968, the Nayan family and the Maktoum family and the Qasimis all get together at what is then a dirt road and shake hands and say, look, each of you are emirs, each of you are rulers. We're going to bond together on something, but we're going to allow the local culture, the local tribes, we're going to intermarry so that we can speak a different kind of a language, and we're going to have a security bound and border that's going to create whatever we call this prosperity issue. So I have to tell you, Sharm el-Sheikh, I was there. What happened after the ceasefire, which was amazing, and just getting the hostages returned, if you just look at that and say, is that an accomplishment? Absolutely. Right? After October 7th, everything changed in Israel. Netanyahu has told the world, he's told me personally, that after October 7th, his concern is not the blue line, the red line, the green line, whatever the border or the boundary is. His concern is protecting his people and those boundaries. So it's extended these discussions of saying, what is sovereign security? How does it work? How can he create these events? Sharm el-Sheikh was something else. All of the Arab leaders coming together in an impromptu manner, supporting a 20-point plan, right? The plan was not legislation, it wasn't doctrine, it wasn't approved by parliaments, it wasn't approved by a council of ministers. It was an idea of 20 points of how can we bring whatever this Middle East is, right, which is a confluence of tribes and thousands of years of cultural history, which needs to be respected with their own relevance. So I'm hopeful, but it's a process, it's not an event. And what we have to do is find ways for the region to be able to solve itself, not for the U.S. to impose a mandate, not for the Brits to impose a mandate, not for Sykes-Picot to be reinvented in 2.0.
Just talking to Turkey, and obviously that's the biggest part of your role. You're the U.S. ambassador to the country based in Istanbul. Do you see Turkey, what is Turkey's role, or what can be Turkey's role in stabilizing places like Syria, Lebanon, and Israel vis-a-vis the other countries in the region? Is it, if you like, a sort of indispensable anchor, as some people have said?
Yeah, 100%. Look, the great thing is we have a bromance between our two presidents, right? We have President Trump and President Erdogan, who found this bond in a very unusual relationship. But if you wind back to the Ottoman Empire, for 550 years, that entity created a process to bond the then-known world, this millet system, right, of wrapping a supervisorial mandate over each of these small cultures. So if you just take the Turkic states, and remember you have one of the largest Islamic populations that's not Arab, surrounded by 8 countries, very difficult countries. When you talk about a zip code, it's one of the most difficult places. 4 seas, the Bosphorus is the heart of life, and facing the other way towards Central Asia, the New Spice Road, it has to go through Turkey, Syria, Iraq, right? These most difficult countries. So we always talk about Turkey being our largest NATO ally, besides America, which it is. Not so respected by Europe, right? Europe still doesn't want them in the European Union. And the Turkish people being hardworking, industrious, and smart. The domestic economy right now is in a bit of a crisis. But it has to be a footprint of this tapestry, whatever this tapestry of a cultural melange is. Turkey is a central piece of Azerbaijan and Armenia. Look what happened. This rift you hear between Israel and Turkey, and I get criticized for saying at the end of Gaza, which is a dramatic step forward, I think that you will see at some point in time Turkey and Israel finding a relationship, whether it's the Abraham Accords or the Solomon Accords or a hybrid. It makes sense.
But just talking about that, how bad is that relationship right now? We've heard statements by President Erdogan that Israel has said are anti-Semitic. He himself and Turkish officials have been outraged by what's happened in Gaza and all the deaths of Palestinians. How bad is that relationship at the moment? And realistically, do you see it turning any time soon for the better?
So the simple answer, it's bad. I think any Islamic country looking at what's happened in Gaza supports a position that you need a 2-state solution or something similar to that to stop the malaise that's happened. But go back to October 5th. On October 5th, the Turkish Israelis had a trading relationship and a foreign trade agreement with a surplus of about $7 billion. It vanishes in an afternoon. So you have inside and outside of the box. Inside of the box for the domestic population in Turkey, they view Israel as Greater Israel. That Netanyahu's game is not to protect the people inside, that he's extending his territory everywhere. The incursions, you've had 1,000 incursions in Syria and Lebanon. They're both reeling, Lebanon with Hezbollah, Syria trying to find its way. Turkey having these buffer zones all around those 8 countries. And the rhetoric between Netanyahu and Erdogan is deafening. It's just rhetoric. At the end of the day, I think they both realize that neither wants the Ottoman Empire. I can tell you, being a user of the system, that President Erdogan is doing a very good job of managing a very difficult situation. And our belief, the U.S. belief, is he's not interested in extending the Ottoman Empire. Taking care of Istanbul and Ankara is enough.
It's hard enough.
The same with Prime Minister Netanyahu. is Israel is being pushed on all sides. The greater Israel philosophy and theory can be done with business and prosperity. It's not going to be done with geography. So I think it's outside rhetoric and politics, which is really complicated with Gaza. Inside domestic policy for both of them is quite difficult, but it's just politics. I think it'll vanish.
One sort of crucial thing at the moment is whether or not Turkey joins the International Stabilization Force, the ISF, that, according to Donald Trump's 20-point plan, will move into Gaza in the place of the IDF, at least in steps. Do you think Turkey should be part of the ISF and have troops or security personnel in Gaza? And if so, do you think there's any way Israel will accept that? Because at the moment it says no way.
So my personal opinion, which is beyond my job description, is absolutely, if I were personally advising Netanyahu, I would say that's one of the most brilliant things he could do, because Turkey has a very good relationship, a criticized relationship with Hamas, right? One of the difficulties with both Qatar, who's been our greatest ally in this process, right? When you think of all the difficulties of getting there and having a discussion, Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed Abdul Rahman Al Thani and the Emir, have been great partners since the first term, and Stephen really cemented that relationship. In the second term, they've been amazing and having a dialogue with Hamas. Quite honestly, Turkey, at the end of these discussions, stepped in to have the final discussion with Hamas, side by side with Qatar, which saved us. It really got the U.S. to a decision point. If you think about it, having Turkey, who has a relationship and an Islamic foothold, will soften whatever has to be done in this disarming Hamas, right? The sustainability. And you say, well, how are you going to disarm them? Are you really going to militarily disarm them, and we're going to be in the soup again? Do you have cachets and say, show up at public storage and we'll give you a ticket, and this is going to go into the IDF? On the other side, do I think it's going to happen? No, because it's just trust, right? It's a bond, and I don't think that trust exists. So whether it's Azerbaijan or Indonesia or another consortium,
they're more likely.
I don't think so.
Just going back to your point about the bromance between President Erdogan and Trump, and it really does seem like that from afar. However, having said that, there are obviously still tensions between Turkey and the US that run deep and that predate this US administration. Just turning to a couple of specific things. I'll turn to F-35s first. The world's most advanced fighter jet. Give or take, they cost $100 million each, depending on the version. Will Turkey end up getting F-35s? Do you think?
I don't know. Let me answer the question a different way. If you look at the military procurement program, so if you want an F-35, no problem. You go through what's now a 10-year program to get approval from Congress. And if you want delivery, once you get there, it's 8 years. So by the time you get to delivery of an F-35, you're at the F-45. If you want F-16s go on mods, right? So a country like Turkey already has a gigantic fleet of F-16s, but you need 30 and 40 and 50 mods. So if you want leather seats and a sunroof and a new computer, you buy mods. That takes another 4 years. So this discussion, by the way, and the reason this administration has been so solid, these discussions have been going on for a decade. So the problem with Turkey was S-400s, without boring this group, a Russian missile defense system. Congress enacted CATSA, which was a specific law to prevent Turkey or its state-owned enterprises from buying certain military equipment during the period that they possessed these S-400s. Honestly, this discussion has been going on for a decade. So President Trump walks in and says, this is insane. Turkey already has a defense business. The drone business for Turkey is the biggest supplier of drones for Ukraine. They have their own jets, called Condor jets. And while we don't sell them jets, they buy Eurojets. They're manufacturing F-35s. They were in an F-35 program with us, They have 4 F-35s that are hangared in California, and they were a big part of the fuselage assembly program.
That they can't access.
They can't access, and by the time that we're done with discussion, the F-35 itself will have been replicated someplace. So all of the controversy going around the military equipment comes to this continuity of a foreign policy. The difficult aspect for America is really our foreign policy has changed every 2 years. A president has 4 years, he goes to the midterms, he has another 2 years that he has to run. We're up against Chinese who have a 50-year perspective. We're up against Russians that have a 100-year perspective. We're up against incumbents everywhere who are entitled with long-range plans and progress in technology. Look at the UAE, look at G42, look what's happening with chips as you move from fossil fuels to something else in this region. It's going to happen with defense. So the issue is complicated. It's more complicated in Turkey saying they are part of NATO. You want them to defend Europe, but Europe doesn't want them to have the highest and best equipment because they're concerned what's happening with Russia. It's insanity.
Is Turkey any closer? Do you say, although it doesn't operate the S-400 system, the US and NATO as a whole want it to effectively get rid of it, give it back to Russia or whatever. Is that any closer to happening?
Yes, I think, look, President Trump and President Erdogan, they had a bilateral at the White House, which was amazing. 6 major issues, all 6 issues had been on the topic for a decade, and they solved most of them, including this, that the S-400 has 2 requirements of what has to happen. Operability, which they've solved, and possession, which is a little more difficult. That's all in process of discussion. My belief is that those issues will be resolved in the next upcoming 4 to 6 months, and that they move to the next level of the relationship, and that it's been solid and good, and everybody's lived up to their obligations, both President Trump to President Erdogan to President Trump.
Yeah. One thing at that White House meeting in September between the 2 presidents, Erdogan and Trump, President Trump sort of signaled that Turkey should stop buying Russian oil. I think after China and India, Turkey is the biggest purchaser of Russian oil and gas. Do you think it should stop or at least reduce purchases, and is that feasible?
In actuality, it's happened. Now, remember these symbiotic relationships with both Iran and Russia, and a country like Turkey that is energy reliant can't happen in an afternoon, but it's already happened. They've reduced their reliance on Russian oil. And as the relationship with Syria, Turkey was so impactful on ridding Syria of the hostilities of the Assad regime. And you've seen we've stepped in and supporting the al-Shar regime, which is doing a very good job in a very difficult environment. They're almost at their 1-year anniversary, December 8th. The energy corridor between Syria and Turkey, the energy corridor between Turkey and Azerbaijan is amazingly beneficial going forward. But what's happened is the oil minister in Turkey has made LNG contracts for about 45 or 50% of the supply going to 2030 with the U.S.
Yeah.
So U.S. LNG is becoming more important. When Syria gets online from the northeast, which is a buffer area, they produce maybe 65,000 barrels of oil today. They should be producing 500,000 barrels of oil. Turkey with Azerbaijan, you've seen what the president did in Azerbaijan and Armenia with Steve Witkoff and R.A. Lightstone's help, again, ended another 100 years of controversy.
Yeah.
Armenia and Azerbaijan couldn't spell each other's name. Now we have, the new hope of a passage, which opens up, again, the Turkey border to Armenia. If you go from the Caspian to the Mediterranean, you start solving all the energy problems. Turkmenistan can't get to the Mediterranean. So
with those, that's a way for Turkey. You mentioned Syria and how it should be. I think you said up to 550,000 barrels a day. Presumably, you mean American investment could help it get there.
Absolutely, but when we think about it, American investment can help everything. But what this administration, what the president has done, is said, look, don't rely on us as an adolescent son. Rely on us. On May 10th, he said, I'm going to remove sanctions.
Yeah.
That's all he said.
Yeah.
I'm going to give Syria a chance. And by the way, the Syrian people are so amazingly resilient and hopeful. And it's the beauty of what's happening. It's very difficult, right? Very, very difficult. Because again, this federalism tribal system where you have Kurds and you have Druze and you have Bedouins and you have Alawites and you have 5 variations of Christians and 10 variations of Islam is very complicated to come together. But our president said, I'm going to remove sanctions and open it up. Now, it's taken a little longer than he thought, but we're almost there.
So just on that point, when you say we're almost there, you're talking about the Caesar Act, which is this, for the audience, a long-standing, sort of huge file of sanctions, which are a real barrier to any foreign investment in Syria, really, especially American investment. And I believe you're going to Washington this month to. Are those part of your talks? And are you confident that the Caesar Act will get repealed in the coming months?
I'm hopeful that it will be repealed. It needs to be repealed. This was against the previous administration. So the current administration of Syria is not the Assad regime. So the Caesar Act was implemented against the Assad regime. So there's no correspondent banking system. There's no central bank. U.S. companies can't participate if they wanted to, nor can the secondary sanctions be imposed on Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all the donor states who want to help make this happen. So my belief is Congress is going to see that it happens. We've told Syria, Secretary Rubio in March said, here's 8 requirements that we are going to watch you.
Yeah.
Foreign fighters, chemical weapons, the return of missing persons, that litany of things, and they are complying. But this is baby steps. It's been 1 year after all of these atrocities. It takes time to get all these horses in the barn, but my belief is Congress will see that, and our message to the region is, this is your regional decision. This is your regional opportunity. We're not going to impose a mandate of how it needs to be done or a new Sykes-Picot 3.0 mechanism that was only derived really because of black gold, right? The West, and I say this honorably and respectfully, we screwed it up.
Yeah.
We drew lines around tribes and regions that were never designed to be together.
This is the last question. I want to turn to Lebanon, and tensions have risen a lot between Hezbollah and Israel and the government of Lebanon in recent weeks, and the 1-year truce, or now slightly more than 1-year truce between Israel and the government of Lebanon is teetering, and we're seeing regular attacks by Israel, including yesterday in southern Lebanon. Are you worried that we will see a reversion to war in Lebanon, or do you think that's still a long way off?
Yes, no, I'm terribly worried. And look, I'm Lebanese, and I get criticized by the Lebanese all the time for what I'm about to say. The confessional system does not work. A Maronite president, a Sunni prime minister, and a Shia speaker, 128 parliamentary seats split equally between Islam and Christians. Everything is a deadlock. There hasn't been a census since 1932. So, by the way, the Maronites are no longer the majority of what's there, and it's a failed state. Lebanon has between $120 billion and $200 billion of public debt. They passed a Bank Resolution Act. There's no risk assessment and how you allocate the restructured debt. And Hezbollah is a foreign terrorist organization by U.S. standards. It also happens to be a large political party within Lebanon that has blocking right. So this idea of saying you have to disarm Hezbollah, and again, it's a little bit of the same situation as it is with Hamas. You're not actually going to do it militarily. The Lebanese armed forces have gone through this before with Hezbollah. 1982 and 83, in a civil war that lasted 15 years. Nobody wants that again. So the message is you have to really have a discussion with Israel. The only controversy is Israel. What you say about a truce never happened. You cannot legally in Lebanon have a discussion with Israel. So we created this artificial, in November of 2024, the Biden administration created this artificial concept, and I don't say this critically, it was the right thing to do, which was sponsored between the U.S. and France. There's no agreement between Israel and Lebanon. There's no agreement between Hezbollah and Israel. There's no agreement between Hezbollah.
It's all indirect between them.
It's all indirect. So it's time, march to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, sit down and have a discussion. You saw a beginning of that. We have a great new ambassador, Michelle Issa. Take Lebanon by the hand, as we're doing with Syria, and say, guys, it's time to end this. Do you see what the UAE did with Israel? Mm-hmm. The only answer to this whole region, when you say, okay, what's the end game? You're never going to solve these tribal feuds. You're never going to solve the religious diversity. Leave it. Flood it with opportunity.
Do you think, as things stand now, and with Hezbollah clearly not disarmed and by many intelligence accounts, Israeli and US ones actually rearming, do you think Israel would be justified in stepping up its attacks and even perhaps sending in ground troops again on a big scale, as some people have suggested it will?
Look, I hope not. The attacks haven't worked. It doesn't work. And this is, again, just my personal opinion, right? The U.S. is saying Hezbollah needs to be disarmed. Hezbollah is a foreign terrorist organization. It cannot exist. My personal opinion is you kill one terrorist, you create 10. That can't be the answer, right? There has to be another answer. And the Lebanese leadership now is, Joseph Aoun, the new president, is terrific. Nawaf Salam, one of the greatest intellects and political knowledgeable people in the system, and Nabi Berri controls really both Amal and Hezbollah. I think they're all at the state of saying enough. They just have to give all of the regrets of the past up and run to Israel and make a deal. This is the only answer. There is no other answer. Iran is Iran. And the people in Iran are the best, most knowledgeable, most educated. We're all hoping that this doesn't end up being a Roaring Lion 2.0 where you have another catastrophe. But if you start dropping in these alignments side by side, then you neutralize the effect of Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, which has been done. Our president standing behind the 12-day war was a dramatic and unbelievable event that gives us this framework of saying, let's go to something else. Let's find something that works. Regime change hasn't changed. The military invasions haven't changed. Israel can't keep confronting 2 billion Islamic people and this anti-Semitism that's blowing all over the world because nobody understands what's happening. Mm-hmm. So I think our president is saying it's time. It's a moment. So going back to your first very good question, it's a window of opportunity, but opportunity is an event. We have to create a process and a system like the UAE did, right? Originally there were 9 emirates. What they created in 1969 was something unbelievable, but it was done on a handshake, trust, and reliability. It's like the Turkish bazaar. Whenever I get depressed, I go into the Grand Bazaar in Turkey and watch $100 million of gold being traded in an afternoon on hawalas, no SWIFT system, no banking system. It's incredible, which is where the world is going, right? If you look at Wish and PayPal and all these non-bank transfer systems, it's trust, it's confidence. We lost that in this Middle East region. We have to rebuild it based on a common thought that all of us can be better, our children can have a better life. Whatever the tribal vagaries of the past, it's gone. That's the payphone. We need to run to Starlink.
Ambassador Barrack, thank you very much for that. I wish I could have had time to ask more questions. That was fascinating. But thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.